Good morning. We have I will call to order the regular meeting of our Zoning and Planning Committee. Today is December 1st, 2016. I'm Lisa Bender. I chair the committee. We have a quorum today with council members Reich, Goodman, Johnson, and Morsami. We have 4 items on our agenda. The first is a public hearing, and we'll return to that after the consent agenda for a certificate of appropriateness appeal at 2019 East Lake Street. The consent agenda includes the other 3 items. Item number 2 is a rezoning at 12 through 18 West 15th Street to allow for to allow for a 75-unit residential development. We were here quite late for the budget hearing last night. Item number 3 is a vacation of part of 30th Avenue South, north of 38th Street and south of Hiawatha Avenue. That application comes from Metro Transit to vacate that roadway. And item number 4 is passage of an ordinance amending our zoning code and our housing maintenance code to allow for regulation of intentional communities. There was quite a bit of discussion at CD about item number 4, but I'm still going to pull it so that staff can give a brief presentation about that. So I will move items 2 and 3. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Those carry. So that returns us to the public hearing, and then we'll go back to item 4 after the hearing. So we will start with staff on item number 1.
Good morning, Chair Bender, members of the committee. Before you is an appeal of the Heritage Preservation Commission's decision on a demolition of historic resource application. The agenda talks about a certificate of appropriateness, but it's a demolition of historic resource application at 2019 East Lake Street. So on October 25th, the Heritage Preservation Commission voted 6-2 to approve the demolition of historic resource application, subject to a few conditions which are listed here. Since this isn't the most common application that you see, I'll just refresh your memory. So here's the ordinance language for demolition of historic resource applications. Essentially, when properties are not designated and are proposed to be demolished and are believed to meet at least one of the criteria that for the definition of a historic resource, the demolition has to first be reviewed and approved by the Heritage Preservation Commission. In analyzing these types of applications, the HPC has to determine first whether or not the property is indeed a historic resource, which the definition of that is on there. It's defined as a property believed to meet at least one of the criteria in our preservation ordinance, but a property that, like I said, is not yet designated. So if the HPC determines that the property is not a historic resource, they can approve the demolition permit. If they determine that the property is a historic resource, they can either deny or approve that demolition permit. To approve the demolition permit, they have to make the findings either that there are no reasonable alternatives to the demolition or that there's an unsafe or dangerous condition which necessitates demolition. In considering whether there are reasonable alternatives, they consider the significance, the integrity, the economic value and usefulness of the property, and then any other considerations as well. So for this particular property, located at 2019 East Lake Street, it's located in the Corcoran neighborhood near Lake and Hiawatha. It's just north of South High School and south of the Pioneers and Soldiers Memorial Cemetery. The applicant is proposing to demolish the existing building that's circled or is in blue. The Minneapolis Public Schools School District purchased all of the property that's shown within this yellow box in the last year, and the applicant submitted applications for demolition permits for all of the properties within that box in July. The other properties received their demolition permits because they were not found to potentially meet any of their criteria for designation, and all of those properties which show up in this aerial, except for the one in the blue box, were demolished in August. The applicant is proposing to also demolish the building that's in the blue box at 2019, and then proposing to construct a new adult education building on the whole site with parking, which would encompass the entire site. But because this property at 2019 was found to potentially meet one of the criteria, the demolition of historic resource application was required. Just briefly going through the property history, around 1892, a church building was either built or moved onto the site. Most likely it was moved from a location on 23rd Avenue. The appellant has done more research on that, and they'll probably speak to that. The property was used by the Vine Congregational Church between 1892 and 1911. In 1911, rear addition was completed, and the property was converted to a meeting hall. Shortly after that, in 1916, more adaptations were made to the building to use it as a factory, and the Wingate Manufacturing Company utilized this building here until about 1925. And then 2 additions were completed while they were there in 1919 and 1922. And then from 1925 to 1940, the Burma Vita Company was located in this building, and various alterations were made after they left in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, while the building was primarily used as a furniture showroom. And then in 1999 and 2000, a major renovation of the building was completed, which converted the property to an office use. This renovation included the installation of the existing vinyl siding, replacement of all the windows and closing of many window openings, interior alterations, structural repair, new stairs, and a new ramp. Here's the only historic photo that can be found in this property. This is from 1929. This was while the Burma Vita Company was located there. And then here's an aerial photo of the property from around that time in 1938. You can see that the general setting has changed pretty significantly over time. And then here's a photo of how the property looks now from across Lake Street. This is from the same vantage point as that historic photo was. You can see that the roof form is more or less the same, but the design details of the building are very different. This is the north elevation of the building. This faces Lake Street. This is the west elevation that faces the building's parking lot. This is the south elevation of the building. And then these are some interior photos. You can see the late 90s, 2000 era renovation. So staff made these findings in the demolition of historic resource analysis. I'll go through each one in a little bit of detail, but they're fully explained in the staff report. First of all, we looked at previous studies that were done of this property. So in 1999, there was a letter from the City Planning Department to the MCDA that noted that this property has no historic or architectural significance. A 2001 reconnaissance survey of South Central Minneapolis did not recommend further study of this property. In 2004, though it was surveyed in 2002, another study noted that it does not contribute to significant broad patterns of history and is not known to be associated with persons important in our past, and it's not architecturally distinguished. And then a 2010 resurvey of this area noted that the property had lost its historic integrity. Upon further research that happened as a result of this application, staff concludes that the property is a historic resource. The property appears to be associated with significant events and exemplifies broad patterns of cultural, economic, and social history. This is because the Burma Shave product, rhyming jingle advertising signs were developed when the company was located at this property. These signs were culturally iconic and were prevalent throughout the country for several decades. There's a couple photos of the signs there. So just to kind of talk about Burma Shave, the product was first developed in 1925, and the first signs were posted on 2 Minnesota highways that same year. The trademark for Burma Shave was applied for in early 1926, but the patent application actually noted the company to be located at a different property. So the Burma Vita Company is believed to move to this property in about 1925 or 1926. In 1927, the first rhyming jingle signs were developed and installed, and those were what the company became famous for. These were very popular, and by 1937, there were over 7,000 sets of these signs located around the country. And then in 1940, at the height of the company's success, they built themselves a new building in Bryn Mawr. The company declined after World War II due to increasing highway speed, zoning regulations on billboards, and struggles that the company had adapting to TV advertising. And then the company was purchased by Philip Morris in 1963, and their iconic signs were discontinued in 1964. Staff also found that the property to be significant for its association with the founders of the Burma Vita Company, who were Clinton Odell and George Hamley, as well as Alan Odell, who developed the successful advertising campaign. The photo on the left shows Odell's sons standing in front of a map that shows all the locations of the Burma Vita signs, or the Burma Shave signs. Here, and then here's the building that they built and moved into in 1940. While the Burma Vita advertising campaigns were culturally iconic and represent a period of cultural history, the subject building has poor integrity. So we established that while the property is indeed a historic resource, another part of the analysis of this application is whether the property retains the integrity that would be required to be designated as a landmark. So staff found that the building still has poor integrity despite that historic resource status. Integrity is the authenticity of the property analyzed through these 7 factors. The location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association. I'll just kind of briefly go through that. Basically, the materials have been significantly changed. The setting's been significantly changed. While the form of the building is generally intact and reveals those separate additions, the fenestration, building ornamentation, and exterior cladding has been significantly changed. And so staff did not find that the property still has integrity of design. And because of these changes to the building, the property doesn't have the integrity of feeling or association that would be required for it to be designated as a landmark. This just summarizes that the building has been significantly altered and is no longer to communicate that significance of the Burma Vita Company or the Burma Shave advertising campaign. The photo in the right corner is from right before the building was most recently renovated in 1999 and 2000. There's some other photos that show the changes since then. Another item that we analyzed in the application was whether or not the demolition of the building was necessary to correct an unsafe or dangerous condition. The applicant didn't contend that, and so it is not necessary for that reason. However, the applicant has stated that the cost of renovations to make the building marketable would very likely exceed the cost of new construction. They didn't provide in the application for the demolition of historic resource any detailed analysis of the financial feasibility of reusing the existing structure, but as I understand, they are planning to speak to that today in a little more detail. And then in considering whether reasonable alternatives to demolition exist, staff finds that the building does not possess the integrity to be designated as an individual landmark, and therefore alternatives which would require the retention of this building would not be reasonable. So going back to this flow chart, just to summarize, the staff and the HPC determined that the property is a historic resource. However, the demolition permit could be approved because there are no reasonable alternatives to demolition. The HPC also has the power to require a mitigation plan, and so in order to mitigate the loss of the building, there's a recommended condition of approval that the staff recommended and the HPC approved, or slightly modified and approved, that the applicant would develop an interpretive plan that would interpret the history on the site with the new use. And staff had specified that this would be about the Burma Vita Company and Burma Shave, but the HPC added additional guidance that would include more interpretation of the different times throughout the building's history. So this was the original staff recommendation. The HPC just slightly modified each of the conditions, the language in the conditions, and as I said, that was approved. There were several public comments that were received related to this application, both in support and against, and there appeared to be several people here to talk to that as well. So I'll stop my presentation there and take any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? I always appreciate your very thorough presentations, really very well organized. All right, we will then move to the public hearing. We have 7 people signed in to speak. And then if there are others who would like to speak that didn't get a chance, you'll be welcome to. I will open the public hearing. Do we have folks here from the project team who would like to speak? Okay. I think I'll just go in order, and then you could, are you signed in on the sheet? Okay. Oh, I see you there. Okay. I think we'll just follow the order on the sheet. I think that will work, and then you'll be able to speak sort of toward the end, unless, would you like to begin? That's fine. Yes, we often invite the project team to speak first, so come on up. So why don't we start then with the project team, Then we'll go to the appellant, and then we'll work through the rest of the list of folks who have signed in, just so we get that overall context. No problem. And when you speak, please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Jack Campbell. I'm the Executive Director of Community Education for the Minneapolis Public Schools, and I'm here representing the district this morning. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share with you some information about this project. The history, great thorough analysis of the property, but a few years back, about 3 or 4 years ago, the district entered into an agreement with Hennepin County to develop the Hennepin County Service Center along Lake Street on the property, on the 6.5 acre property that the district owns 2 blocks away. We house an adult education building, house an adult education program in that building, and because we sold the property to Hennepin County, we looked for nearby property that we might be able to construct another building so we could house adult education and also our Transition Plus program, both geared toward adults in Minneapolis. And so that's what we embarked on. And so both projects, we believe, have the support, or we know they have the support of the Corcoran neighborhood. We think they're positive in the development of Lake Street, a new building, a new Hennepin County Service Center along Lake Street, and also this proposed building with the Minneapolis Public Schools, housing and serving adults in the community. If you want, I can talk about the programs of those adults, but primarily I think that was covered. English language learners are learning English and also receiving GEDs. We serve about 1,000 people a day in the English and GED program currently on Lake Street. That will continue. And then we have Transition Plus services that provide services for 18 to 21-year-old adults, young adults, focusing on employment, focusing on independent living skills, and focusing on post-secondary education and training. That's Transition Plus area. So we think there's good support in the neighborhood. We think that we also would obviously support the historical significance of this issue around the Burma shape. We think we could do that. I'm, for one, don't know how we would do that, but I'm sure other people can speak to that. But certainly we would support that idea.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the applicant? Okay. Then I will then invite Mr. Sandberg or others from the folks who have appealed the project to come speak. And again, then we'll go back through the list.
Can I use this microphone? Yes, my name is Steve Sandberg, and I'm with Save the Shave, and we've been working on the history of this building. And I'd just like to read the reason for our appeal. On October 25th, Minneapolis City staff acknowledged that this building did meet 2 of the city's 7 criteria for historic designation, as you just heard, and a building only needs to meet 1. The city also acknowledged that the owner had not sufficiently researched alternatives to demolition, which you also just heard. The city's recommendation and HPC ruling to grant demolition under these circumstances deprives the public of any opportunity for comment and any opportunity to discuss other possibilities of preserving this newly recognized historic asset, either in whole or in part, or possibly move it to a new location. It is quite likely the last, oldest wood frame structure left on Lake Street, and built in 1882, has been home to businesses and institutions which link us directly to 134 years of Lake Street history. No other building will ever present this opportunity. As 2 of the commissioners said on the 25th, how do we really know what the integrity of this building is without getting inside and peeling back the layers to have a look? We ask that the City of Minneapolis Zoning Committee stipulate a study period of sufficient length of time to determine what all the options are for preserving this building, which has only now been acknowledged to meet the city's criteria for historic designation. Chairperson Benner and zoning members, we appreciate this opportunity to appeal this decision that permits demolition of the building also known as the Burma Shave building. On the 25th, HPC and CPED agreed for the first time that this building does meet the criteria set forth in the city's heritage preservation statutes for historic designation. Their decision on the 25th changed the status of this building and affirms what we have been working so hard to convey to the city, that this building is a historic resource. But on the same day, they ordered this historic resource be demolished. This historic building has been hiding in plain sight, its history not fully or commonly known. Built in 1882, it's the oldest wood frame structure still standing on Lake Street and second oldest structure on Lake Street of any kind. It's not a private residence, but a building that reflects working men and women, immigrant businesses, and Lake Street development decade by decade from Lake Street's earliest days. We would like to share with you the history that we have uncovered, and first like to lay out the reasoning behind our appeal and why we believe the heritage preservation statutes of Minneapolis support that appeal. In Appendix G, that's in the Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Plan, which was adopted by the City Council on October 2nd, 2009, on page 1, under the heading, Legal Basis for Preservation, it states, CLG responsibilities include providing for public participation in the local preservation program. And Minneapolis is a certified local government by having adopted these guidelines. This has not been allowed to occur. For 13 months prior to October 25th, we repeatedly sought to work with Minneapolis Public Schools, the owner of 2019 East Lake Street, to allow access to the building for the purpose of conducting a historic survey. We registered with Preservation Alliance of Minnesota, which in turn agreed to assist in the survey, but we were denied access and received no further replies. The city now agrees that the building meets the city's own criteria for historic designation, and we believe that the city needs to stipulate that public participation be allowed for in a meaningful way prior to demolition. City statutes also require that the owner explore all alternatives to demolition, and the city staff report that you just heard states that that has not occurred. We ask that this committee stipulate that this requirement be met as well. The discovery of this building arises at a time when historic preservation is emphasizing more and more the important stories that a building has to tell, not only its architecture. This repurposed building, which retains all its roof lines since 1916, has the overwhelming majority of the architectural integrity from the period of significance. The building's strength is in its stories throughout its long history, and it would be a case of not seeing the forest for the trees to permit demolition based upon what is missing when alternatives have not been explored. And I point out the Minneapolis Mill Rooms complex as a perfect example of buildings that still tell powerful stories despite their lack of integrity. We wish to explore ways to keep the places that make our city unique and to tell their stories. East Lake Street's development parallels the stories that happened within this building. We continue to believe that there is a win-win solution to this situation and have included our ideas and suggestions in this packet. Given the opportunity, we would welcome working with Minneapolis Public Schools. Our ideas range from incorporating the building into a new campus environment, creating a student-run coffee shop or bookstore on immigration history theme, to stripping down the building to its basic shapes and roof lines, enclosing it in glass, opening its walls, or moving the building to another site. I would like to, before I turn it over, I know other people want to speak, just run down some of the history that we've discovered for this building. And like I said, it was built in 1882. And I also wanted to say that, yes, we all love our city. Lake Street is an important part of our city. And I think we all agree that if we could find a place on Lake Street that was built in 82 to welcome immigrants back when Lake Street was just a rutted dirt road and was not yet even part of Minneapolis, wouldn't we want to try and save it?
Mr. Sandberg?
Yes.
So as you've stated, the issue of the building meeting the criteria for historic designation isn't really in question. So I know you've done a lot of work and research, and we would welcome hearing that. But the real issue in front of us is the integrity of the building, and that's what would be allowing us to support the demolition versus preservation. So again, welcome your testimony about the history that you've uncovered, but just wanted to sort of remind everyone about what's the question. Because as you said, our own bodies have found that it meets the criteria for preservation and designation.
Yeah. I would like to show some of the history because, and there will be other people to help me do that. But I do want to highlight maybe I can just put this here. What I refer to as Appendix G. So we're not talking merely about just the integrity of the building, which, as I pointed out, is one of the considerations, but does not have to be the consideration, as pointed out with the Mill City ruins, and as well as alternatives to demolition that have not been fully explored. And I really do think that this is a very unique situation that you would find a 134-year-old building with this kind of history after being a Vine Church, which was charter members met in 1881 on Minnehaha and Lake Street in a farmhouse, and there's been and they built that building the following year. It was in 19. And they moved the building, which I think is also a very fascinating part of this history, in 1892 in the era of horses. And I don't know exactly how they moved it. There are two permits that show moving permits in 1892, one in April of 1892 and one in May of 1892. There's on the internet from Michigan, there was a church that was moved in 1892, and they had photos of it. They used one horse and a capstan, and they were able to move this building with this chain hoist with one horse that wound the chain up. So in 1909, the building became a Scandinavian workers' hall called Hugnad Hall. It was the meeting place for the International Working Men's Scandinavians Association, and also was where Good Templar chorus and the Hugnad chorus met, and now those two choruses combined, and now the Norwegian Glee chorus is historic from that. After it was that, I think the most fascinating was the era when wing manufacturing was there. But I will let other people speak to those issues. But it was designated on October 25th, and it is now December 1st. There has not been any time to consider public participation in saving this building. So that's the main thing I want to point out to you, is this is a rare opportunity, and the public needs some participation to decide what is done with this building. Thank you very much. Oh, and I have some Burma shave, refrigerator magnets. I don't know if it's legal to give committee members swag, but see me afterwards if you're willing to risk the consequences. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And again, thanks for taking so much time of your time. All right, so so I think I'll just go down the list then, because I think it will work out that way. So then we have Sherry Albers next. And after that, Adam Tomzik, David West.
Good morning. I'm Sherry Albers, and I am a volunteer for the Hennepin History Museum. I give tours, and I also give tours for Preserve Minneapolis, and I forget what else. There was one other thing. Anyway, I'm going to speak about tangible history. And again, it'll be a little bit more of a history lesson. I'll try to be brief on that. I'm going to start with a quote that I actually just found yesterday, because we're constantly researching this location. This was a quote by Mary Burnell, and it appeared in a 1911 Minneapolis Morning Tribune. She and her husband had emigrated to Minneapolis in 1871 from Hartford, Connecticut. And she wrote, "Although we were small in numbers, we made up for it in enthusiasm. Within a few months, we had built and paid for a $5,000 church building. The older churches gave us much help and encouragement. We were an isolated and unorganized community. Only a few homes grouped about some factories along the railroad tracks. She's referring to Hiawatha and Lake. 2 or 3 miles of open prairies separated us from the city limits, then at Franklin Avenue. On all sides of us, there were grain fields. For several months before organizing, we had been having Sunday school in the district school. When we organized a church, we determined to have a church building. For many years, ours was the only evangelical church for 2 or 3 miles on any side. The church front circular window, it's seen on page 21 in your packet, and we apologize for such a long packet, but it's pretty interesting history. May or may not be under that vinyl siding, but we do know that the A-line of that church is still part of the design, the eclectic design you see on this building. From building permits, we know that Nell Wingett made major additions. And quoted in Shutter's History of Minneapolis, Wingett says she added many windows to create a pleasant and sunny atmosphere for her 16 workers, mostly women. Burma Vita most likely enlarged the facilities and added the interior ramp to wheel out its Burma Shave product and jingle signage. Comparing the 2 photos that I have on the screen here, we see that the building's exterior shape has not changed. Only window placement and siding have been altered in the last 85 years. A unique package of many histories that span 134 years and that truly illustrate East Lake Street's development is embodied within the walls of this building. I will also speak about alternatives in a moment. As for keeping physical evidence that this building ever existed, I mentioned Mill Ruins Park, that, despite the deterioration of the remains, give the viewer a sense of how the Mississippi's power was funneled into various chambers to run the businesses that put Minneapolis on the map. A viewer can walk a wooden path and touch the brick walls. Speaking of this tangible history, let me tell you of the walking tours that I lead through the Hennepin History Museum and Preserve Minneapolis. There are 5 missing mansions on my Washburn Fair Oaks tour. I hand out pictures and tell the stories of the homes of the Morrisons, the Pillsburys, and the Washburns. And when we get to the top of the hill in Washburn Fair Oaks Park, there's this patch of cement that David Stevens from MHS once told me was the last remnant of the 80-room Washburn mansion. And so when we get up there, the people are all interested, and everybody has to stand on it. And it's all that's left, just this chunk of concrete. But it gives people a sense of what had happened there. This house that had been built in 1883, torn down in 1924, where William Drew Washburn and his wife and 7 children lived with their 12 servants who had immigrated from many countries, Ireland, Sweden, Norway, Germany. And then let me take you to Lake Street. I worked on the Museum in the Streets project that the Lake Street Council did. I worked on research and fixing the photographs for putting on their plaques. When you get to Grossman Chevrolet, it's now a Somali meat market, but there's still just one banner, it's not a banner really, it's a sign, and it doesn't say anything, but it's still that shape. You look at the old picture of Grossman Chevrolet and you can see that it was there. But now it's a new business and it's still as important, and it still continues this whole continuum that happens on Lake Street. Things keep changing, and Lake Street has been a venue for immigrants all its life, and it continues to be. Then we get to the Avalon Theater, designed by Perry Crozier in 1927, began showing talking movies in 1927, was a porn theater from the 50s to the 80s, and has housed in the Heart of the Beast puppet and mask theater since. So again, it's a tangible piece. It's something that we can use. Other Minnesota historical sites like Wonderland Amusement Park still has the incubator building where preemie babies were kind of like a freak show at this amusement park. And Longfellow Zoological Gardens still has the Longfellow House and a very badly eroded statue of Longfellow on its grounds. Most people don't even know it's there, but it's there. So if we go on my East Lake tour, we'll stop at Ingebrigtsen's Scandinavian shops. It's been there for like 90 years. And then we stop at a Mexican restaurant that was once Sunnison's Music Center. And then we head toward the Lehman Cemetery on Cedar and Lake. But we stop at the place on 17th and Lake where Gustavus Adolphus Hall used to stand. I tell the tour goers about the Scandinavian connections that helped new immigrants with their transition into American life. Debates, lectures, music, and dancing happened in the Swedish community hub. I talk about the little music shop that occupied the southeast corner, Thorgard Music Shop, where Arthur Sunnison tuned pianos. Sunnison eventually developed his own Scandinavian music business across the street, only to evolve into country western music at his son's urging. There is such rich history of the working man and businesses along Lake Street. All the while, the people are on the tour are listening to me talk about this empty lot where Gustavus Hall stood. Tangible history isn't necessary, but it provides a vital link. And since the building at 2019 East Lake exudes its eclectic history as a place where dreams began and grew, its architecture deems saving, at least some of it. While the Kickernick building downtown represents Nell Wingett's greatest successes, this building on Lake Street is where she began. When we started this, we were fighting for Burma Shave, but then we found there was a whole lot more history that we didn't know about. We've got the church, we've got the Hugnad Hall, we've got Wingett Manufacturing, which became Kickernick, and then we have Burma Shave, and we haven't even looked into the history beyond that of the businesses that occupied there. The histories of Harvester Works, Minneapolis Moline, the City Streetcar Station, the Railroad Hub, Toro, Porky's Drive-In, Wonderland, and Gustavus Hall are now delegated to pedestrian plaques along Lake Street. This building at 2019 East Lake has the potential for people to step into the stories of those who worshiped, found social connection, and labored within these walls. People will be able to stand on the same floor, much like the workers' footprint showcased in the Sears Global Market building. They might be able to walk through a timeline of history, much like